Grand Life with Purpose. Welcome to the launch of the first Birthing a Sacred Conversation podcast. I invite you into our sacred sanctuary where it's a safe place of validation, where you're seen, held, and sacredly secured. I welcome you to be seated at the sacred table. Here we will serve spiritual nourishment for the soul that will provide life encouragement and rejuvenation. I am your host, Zawadi Eaton, intuitive healer. I'm a minister, therapeutic and coach and life coach. I'm a storyteller, poet. I'm a writer. I'm a humanitarian, freedom fighter, visionary, creative soul. I am mindfully present, and I am so happy that you decided to accept my invitation and to sit at the seat of our sacred table. Together, let's cultivate a sense of optimism and hope. So join us on this journey of self discovery and spiritual growth. In our sacred conversation, we will explore the power of the human spirit through storytelling and meaningful dialogue. So, again, thank you for accepting my invitation to sit at the table. So, we begin this podcast with sacred storytelling. I want to invite you to pull up a chair and sit at the table as I open Pandora's box and share my journey. This journey of rebirth is about embracing my true self, understanding that I am more than enough, recognizing my worth, and celebrating my wonderful, unapologetic liberation. It's a metamorphosis of my transformation where I welcome you into my sacred space to discuss overcoming imposter syndrome and moving toward authenticity. Overcoming imposter syndrome and discovering authenticity in the process of healing and my wholeness journey. This was an experience of true soul awakening. It required me to return back to the root or origin of when imposter syndrome was conceived in my womb, the day of conception. I had to re enter the womb, confronting my old wounds, trauma, fears, hurts, pains, sexual abuse, all of the narratives that connected itself to my imposter syndrome. Dismantling decades of layers of this shadow that was following me for years. I wanted to know. My soul was yearning. It was empty. I couldn't fill it with relationships, situationships. I couldn't fill it with work. I couldn't fill it with money. I couldn't fill it with all the things that I needed to be me. All I knew was I was drowning, suffocating from the noose of imposter syndrome. So we talked about the layers of trauma. And what does it truly mean to be authentic? It's embracing our true selves without the fear of judgment. It's about stepping out of the shadows of imposter syndrome and shedding the burdens of false expectations that dishonors our true self without shame and judgment. It's a transforming a spiritual awakening from shame and to be unapologetically naked. So I talked about taking you on the journey where the origin or the seed of my conception of imposter syndrome, which were many seeds. But I'm going to start with the first seed when I was 6 years old. My mother and my father came to the conclusion that they were no longer able to live in the same space in harmony. So they separated. But part of my father's separation decree was that he was going to come and pick up me and my three other siblings on the weekends. Well, this particular day was the day he was going to come and get us. I remember, and I'm revisiting that space even as we're speaking. I was looking out of this big window that peered across the street. We had horses. And I was waiting anxiously, excitedly to hear my father's car pull up, to see his car turn that corner, and I was ready to race to the door to greet him. Well, 12 o'clock p.m. turned into 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock turned into 5 o'clock. My mother would come out the room to look at me and say, I don't think he's coming. But as a 6-year-old, I wouldn't give up hope. I said, he's coming. And I kept peering out the window. The sun began to, I'm pausing. The sun began to turn and set. And the darkness began to move in. And I still sat there. I didn't even want to go use the restroom. I held myself because I didn't want to miss him. All of a sudden, it was from 12 noon, it turned into 12 midnight. My eyes was heavy. My heart was aching. The disappointment was overwhelming. And my mother came out the room. She said, go put your pajamas on and go to bed. And I yelled with anger, no, he's coming. My mother allowed me to sleep on the couch that night. But that was the first seed. I remember saying to myself, well, if daddy comes the next day, I'm going to be sure to be perfect. That way, he'll always come and get me. And he'll love me. That was the seed of perfectionism. But then there was other seeds that was clothes on top of clothes on top of clothes. As a child, I was teased and bullied. I was too dark for some and not enough for others. I would steal quarters out my mother's purse to take to school to buy people's friendships. They would stand in front of me and talk about me and call me names. And I just took it because I wanted to be accepted. But it was chipping away at my self esteem, it was chipping away at my soul. Growing up, even in high school, in elementary school, I just remember never feeling safe and secured. We were always uprooting and moving here and there. And it was such a hard place. I knew in my soul the very thing that I ran from. I didn't want to have to re enter into the womb of all the heartaches and the traumas that I experienced. But I knew it was necessary to rediscover who I was created to be. Before I knew you, before I was entered into my mother's womb, God knew me and created me for greatness. So I was in search of that person. Who was she? There was a missing piece to my puzzle. So it was time for me to re-enter into the origin of my conception and begin to dismantle the decades of layers of my imposter syndrome. I was on a quest to find me. It didn't care if I didn't have any friends. I didn't care what my family thought. I didn't care what my what society thought. I was desperate. So in 2013, my journey began. After the transitioning and death of my partner, I was tossed into my journey to discover who I am. So it was about stepping out of the shadows of my imposter syndrome, shedding off the burdens and false expectations that dishonored my true self without shame and judgment, transforming a spiritual awakening from shame to unapologetically naked. I was ready to embrace my journey. I was ready to re enter the womb, to look within. I call the mirror of grace, compassion, and empathy. Lots of tears, lots of anger, lots of grief. I was ready to embrace those fears and those hurts and those shames and the pain, wounds without judgment. It was time for me to re enter the womb. Imposter syndrome has forced many of us to remain hidden in the dark shadows, trapped in our delusional fairy tales that create internal bondage, that undermines our self worth, amplifies our insecurities, and lead to self sabotage, a self fulfilling prophecy from our thoughts and words and feeling intertwined with the feeling of fraudulence, fraudulence, illustrated by the metaphor of the Garden of Eden. And here is my sacred story. When Adam and Eve would walk around naked, they didn't even know they had no shame. It wasn't until they ate of the forbidden fruit, their eyes were opened and they hid themselves from their nakedness by covering themselves with fig leaves. Metaphorically, those fig leaves represented my imposter syndrome. I, too, covered myself, suffocating in the shame in my internal fraudulent soul, out of touch with me. Imposter syndrome was the burden of the fig leaf. The fraudulent expectation and the pressure to conform often felt like a constraint, to need to cover myself. But literally and metaphorically, this fig leaf, showing up perfect, unworthy, never good enough. I was a puppet. I conformed to everyone else's opinions of me. I would show up in social spaces and I would feel empty on the inside. On the mask, when others looked at me, they thought I had it all together. I said the right words, I wore the right clothing, I showed up with a smile, I showed up perfect. I can remember when I used to do shows and I would get standing ovations. Lines of the people would wait for me to come out. And I remember how I felt so anxious on the inside. I felt empty. All I can hear was all these wonderful accolades. And I didn't even know who they were talking to. I would go back to my apartment, would not even celebrate. I just said, okay, what's next? I would be invited to corporate settings to present my piece called My Name is Forgotten. CEOs, presidents sitting up in front will be crying, standing ovations. But I was like, who are they? Who are they standing for? But with the smile and the mask on my face, I would get invited to sit at tables to strategically plan for events or how to bring programs together. These men and women were millionaires, millionaires. And I would be sitting at the table. I was their guest. And they would just pick my brain. The mask. I hid in the only thing that I felt alive, which was writing, reading, my creative self flow. the rediscovering of true self. My authenticity was a journey of rediscovering who I was, not the person that society wanted me to be. Or, as a minister, I helped build churches and traveled across the country. And I just didn't know who I was. Indeed, a journey of rediscovery was hard. And it was a process that I had to begin to peel back the layers of my bleeding and bruised soul. The process was challenging. There were nights that I felt alone, isolated. I was dying to myself. I was dying to that old self. It required me pulling off the old clothing in order to see the nakedness of my soul. Then I realized that the authenticity, I had to be introduced to vulnerability. The nakedness was exposing my vulnerability. It often perceived as a weakness, but it was the cornerstone of authenticity. You can't, they both are one in one. They iron sharpens iron. They're sacred covenant together. I had to embrace vulnerability, which means I had to look in that mirror of my soul. Again, many nights. My mind in yoga, they call it the monkey mind, was just overwhelming some nights. But I knew it was needed. So I had to dive deep to understand myself. It's essential to recognize that authenticity is multifaceted concepts with various interpretations. For me, it was finding whom I was created to be. It was alignment with my soul and my core values, what I deeply was called to do, who I was born as. Embracing my imperfections, accepting the flaws and limitations without falling into self criticism. I had to be genuine in my interactions. I had to arrive without the mask. Ultimately, I reached that journey after years and years of peeling off. I came to my oasis. Traveling in the desert, there's oasis. Traveling in the wilderness, I had my oasis. It's about discovering what feels genuine to you and living according to that truth. Authenticity was born. Regardless of what people think, what society says, we can't live by social media and the facade of social media. Do you know how many people that are posting, and I don't care if they have 10.5 million, if they're not doing the work, they show up as imposters? I take a sacred pause. Authenticity as a powerful metaphor for me was being naked without shame. My oasis in my journey was an awakening state of consciousness, mindfully present, connecting deeply to the vulnerability and the freedom found in embracing my true self without needing others' validation. And when I say by that, it's okay. Our souls was created for love, for touch, for sacred wholeness and healing, not for validation that was of other people's opinions. It's okay to be valued, to be nurtured, to be honored. But just because you don't value me, and one day you stop honoring me, and one day you stop nurturing me, does not take away who I am, worthy. My simplicity and my oasis. I no longer am moved by other people's opinions of me. It took many years to get to this place. My spiritual journey, my metamorphosis. I finally come to my oasis, my transformation. So, my sacred conclusion I'd like to share, like Dorothy lost in Oz, desperately seeking to return home. Authenticity represents a yearning to return to the Garden of Eden, our oasis of simplicity, to honor the harmony of our souls. We must listen to and obey our inner whispers, even when they go unrecognized, unappreciated by others. This leads to layers of dismantling I call the onions. Now, my soul only connects to souls that I know have done the work, cultivating deep and meaningful relationships that are sacred. I'm open and I'm honest about my vulnerability. I am not ashamed of my past. I'm not ashamed of what I've done or what I've been through. I've now developed self awareness. I embrace my true self with love, with worthiness, experiencing profound personal and spiritual transformation is walking in harmony with your soul, one with God, oneness in with yourself, being completely at peace. So I thank you for being at the table, for stopping by. And if this spoke to your soul, please subscribe, like, and share. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments. And also, if you are looking for a spiritual transformation, a coach who can help you navigate through difficulties or to help you unlock purpose, take you through the healing portal, please, I look forward to working with you. I am not a therapist. I am not a counselor. I'm a minister, intuitive healer who's been doing this work for over 40 years. My information will be left in the comments. Again, thank you. I honor you. And I will see you again. Blessings.